Welcome back. This is Daybreak, and thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Dr. Makali Mulu is the lawmaker representing Kitui Central Constituency and a member of the Budget Committee of the National Assembly who joins us here this morning, as well as Kevin Osido, who is the Executive Director at the County Governance Watch. Gentlemen, thanks for staying with us. Dr. Mulu, coming to you, the standoff at the Mediation Committee over what's supposed to be going to the counties. What's the cause of the deadlock at the Mediation Committee?
I would actually say there's any deadlock. What is happening, we are still negotiating. You know, it's a mediation committee, and there's always give and take. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to sort out a number of issues. Maybe if you allow me, Ayubu, I can just possibly bring members up to speed, or viewers up to speed in terms of why are we where we are today. Before the 2024 Finance Bill was rejected, we had, as a House, approved the Division of Revenue Bill, which had been signed by the President to become an Act of Parliament. And Division of Revenue Act, normally, what it does, it shares resources between the two levels of government. So by doing that, you are able to know how much has been given to the national government and how much has been given to the county governments. By the time we passed that bill to become an Act of Parliament, the expectation was the 2024 Finance Bill would also be passed by the House to generate an additional 346 billion.
It was passed.
No, it wasn't. The
bill was passed.
The bill, yeah.
It was withdrawn.
I believe to become an Act of Parliament.
Yeah, but it never became.
It was passed, but it wasn't assented to by the President. So, on the basis of that, we did approve pass the Act. Yeah. And in that Act, we had allocated counties 400.01 billion. That was the amount. And actually, this amount, if you remember, was also reached as a result of another series of mediation. Because initially the allocation was about 385. Then we negotiated and we pushed it up to 400. And I was also part of that negotiation. So, with that, we also passed the Provision Act, which now, where the national government, part of the share, went ahead and passed the Appropriation Act. And then for the counties, the County Allocation Resources Bill, which we call CACARA, the County Allocation Revenue Bill, had not been passed. So the counties were supposed, as a result of the Division of Revenue Act, now go ahead and come up with that other bill, which now allocates resources horizontally. Now you have given a figure for the counties, 400. Now the other bill is supposed to share now the money to the counties, each county, to get how much it gets. So that was before the finance bill was rejected. So when the finance bill was rejected, now the question was, the expected resources you had to come through the finance bill could not be, because those were just projected. And the projection was within a year we'll be able to collect those resources. So it was so fierce you cannot collect those resources. So what did the National Assembly do? Now, with that reality, we had to amend a number of other acts. Okay. So the first one we had to amend was the Division of Revenue Act. Now, in that amendment, we reduced the figure for the counties by 20 billion.
20 billion, from 400 billion.
From 400 billion.
So that becomes 380 billion.
It becomes 380.
So what was the rationale?
The rationale was not because of the fact that we'll have a financing gap of 346. So it's like the national government decided we'll take 325 of the gap, and then the counties will take 20 billion, while the national government takes 325. I hope you're getting the mathematics. Okay. So, as a result of that, then we amended the Division of Revenue Act to reflect this new reality. And then went ahead even with that because of the pressures in terms of financing, and immediately did a Supplementary Appropriation Act, which factored in this reduction. And then the act was also passed. It's now an act of Parliament. You know, we have now, that was done around mid-August. And this was informed by the pressure because we needed the government to start now spending, and they could not spend without this new act, which was now bringing the figures down to accommodate the rejection of the finance bill. So after amending now the Division of Revenue Act, we passed it again as a House, and then we pushed it to Senate. So when the senators now debated the amended act, they rejected our amendments. And obviously the law requires that when the two houses don't agree, then you form a mediation committee to now discuss and agree on a common bill, which will now be presented in the two houses. So that's where we are. So as a mediation committee, that's what we're trying to discuss now. So the senators are saying, if you look at the current act before amendment, it says, in case there's a shortfall in terms of collection, revenue collection, that shortfall should be taken up by the national government. So the figure for the county should remain. In that case, then, they are saying you have no business amending this act, because clause 5 of it says any shortfall should be taken by the national government. The national government was saying, we are not expecting as big a shortfall as we realized because of the rejection of the finance bill. Normally, any revenue projection will register some shortfalls. If you look at for the last 10 years, we have been registering some shortfall, but of about 100 billion, 80 billion over the years. But nobody expected that the shortfall would be as high as 346. So the position of the National Assembly, where I see it, is that we agree. The Act says the national government should take up the shortfall. But the shortfall of 346 billion is so huge that we would also want the counties to take a small share of it, of 20 billion, and the national government take 325 for this unique year where we have no finance bill. But then next year, we'll now revert back to the normal. And that's, now this is the discussion.
All right. So we talk about then the impact, but before that, was there a consensus at that level of sharing up the costs here and the burden on the part of the counties through the Council of Governors and the national government?
No, you know, normally the Council of Governors normally would not come into this debate. Normally, they would not come to this, because what we are saying is, now we are trying to get that consensus. There was no consensus. You know, we just went ahead as a National Assembly and informed by the fact that we don't have a 2024 finance bill, then those amendments were done. So the Senate is saying, you should have not done those amendments before discussing with us. And that's where the mediation now is taking place. So we are trying to negotiate to get to
not the level of the mediation as such, but that was down from the 400 billion initially allocated in anticipation of the passing of the finance bill 2024, which would become an act of parliament. When this cost cutting was to happen, the national government takes its burden, the counties do. So who are the parties who are involved?
Now, at that point, it's actually the National Assembly which was involved. And the executive. Because I remember the executive submitted to the budget committee a listing of all the programs which their budget were to be reduced, so that we factor in this 25 billion into the ministry budget for the national government. So the expectation was that then the county governments, through Senate, would also agree to scale down their activities by 20 billion. So that in that case, then we'll have factored in the rejected finance bill into the budget.
All right.
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes, please.
Seems there's a lot to this, given that we are talking about what the counties are saying is not going to sustain the devolved units. There are already complaints of delayed exchequer releases of the allocations that are supposed to be coming to the coffers of the counties. How a double tragedy is this?
Precisely it is. In fact, the sooner this matter is sorted out, Ayub, the better. Because we have serious challenges of financing for devolution, and especially for critical sectors. But even before I get into this, I think Mheshimiwa is belaboring this point too much, and is good for our viewers, because Ayub, the issue here is not the legal framework. Those CARA can be mentioned, DORA, Division of Revenue Allocation Bill, the County Allocation and Appropriation Act can be mentioned. The concern here, Ayub, from what analysis we have done, both as Friends of Devolution and even as County Governance Watch, the organization where I serve, is that there is political interest. And this political interest is dual-purposed. Dual-purposed both at the National Assembly and also at the level of the counties. The crust of the matter is what we call RMLF, the Roads Maintenance and Fuel Levy. Because there was a meeting around 2023, and this is the challenge of institutions again, that even as we talk about this funding, we have an institution called the IBEC, which should have been shared. In fact, is shared by the Deputy President, but given the challenges that we have had up to a level where our Deputy President has had to be impeached, follow-up for some of these agreements and proposals that are made become therefore the problem. So the contest here is 10.9 billion shillings, which is supposed to go to the county governments. Remember that even as we talk about these roads, there are roads that are devolved as per Schedule 4 of our Constitution. The constituency development funds and our members of parliament, National Assembly representatives, where Mheshimiwa here sits in, are interested in this money, largely for mechanisms of campaigns, to be able to tell the citizens, nilisema nitawajengia barabara hapa na ndio hii. So that it is not the governor saying that the county government built that road. Because if we do not look at it from that kind of a mechanism, then all these laws that Mheshimiwa is saying should have facilitated resources to the counties so that the counties do their work. And because there is a precedence, for example, that when President William Ruto took over the reins of power, he indicated that within 6 months of his administration, there are functions that have not been fully devolved. And there are almost 23 of them. From housing, we are seeing this affordable housing business, to health, to water, to agriculture, so many things that are going on. If you do the totality of resources of these functions that are still held up by the national government and are supposed to go to the counties, it is more than the contentious issues that the Senate and the National Assembly are actually dealing with. And one of those examples is, for example, national museums, where about 2 to 3 months ago, the national government actually released a number of museums across the country, and the counties were able to benefit up to 425 million shillings of that. But then you ask yourself, libraries and healthcare and roads and agriculture and water and all these others, what is the priority of the common citizen of Kenya? So if we can agree that our legislators, our representatives, the people that are honorable members who sit at that august house, can be able to secede their political interests and then find a way of dealing with these issues. Because I remember that even as Mheshimiwa says, and I partly agree with him, that the Council of Governors does not even feature here, we have had years where COG actually sued the National Assembly, and there were demonstrations in this city called Nairobi, where governors across all the counties came and were demonstrating on the streets. We do not want to go back to that kind of an aspect and context, because we have made very important success and progress. So our legislators need to agree that we must deal with our political interests and indeed how we engage with the resources that are supposed to go to the citizens. And this money, even if we talk about the 20 billion, which is a contentious issue, from 400.1 to 390.1 billion, and the difference there, I mean 380, the difference is only 20 billion. So if they were able to secede the 10 billion for roads maintenance and fuel levy to the counties to do the work that is supposed to be done, the shortfall would be talking about Ayub is only 10 billion. And then if the government had political goodwill to devolve all the other resources, including health, then we would not be talking about monies. But of course, we can go further and further and even talk about the malperformance of county governments insofar as on-source revenue is concerned, because that has also not been very positive from the counties. And
that's up to the extent of even that 10 billion Kenya shillings gap, the aspect of the funds following the functions,
precisely,
if completely unbundled.
Precisely.
All right.
Precisely.
Dr. Makali Mulu, then how does this first, the delay in the release of the funds by the Exchequer, the minimum required disbursement to the devolved units, which the Constitution does stipulate, plus what's happening at the mediation level where you sit as a member of the Budget Committee, contributing to what in the past has been a twisted economic legacy, given the systematic marginalization and locking out of some regions, a large majority of a big chunk of Kenya from the center, because that's where the power and the resources were. How are we pedaling back to that time, given that we have a dispensation, an architecture where we ought to have been talking about economic prosperity and counties being viable economic units than the debates we have at the moment of cash crunch, delayed salaries, and agreements with local banks that the COG says is as unsustainable?
Yeah, sure. Let me first of all agree that there are political issues, but I think we also need to agree that there are also technical issues and legal issues. And actually what the committee has done, and that's why we were not able to agree in the first two meetings, is that we have tested what are the legal issues and what are the political issues which we need to sort out before we agree on a figure. For example, we have already passed the Appropriation Act, the Supplementary Appropriation Act, as National Assembly for the national government resources, which means the national government is able now to access the resources. The counties are not able to access the resources. But if you remember the Supreme Court opinion, which they gave to the House, they said you cannot come up with an Appropriation Act before you sort out the Division of Revenue Act, which divides the resources between the two levels of government. So a technical question, which is now a legal question, is in a situation where the National Assembly has passed an Appropriation Act, a Supplementary Appropriation Act, before you sort out the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, how do you proceed? And that's the one thing we need to solve, because it means if you don't amend the Division of Revenue Act, then the amended Appropriation Act cannot be operational. So these are the legal questions. And I remember you saw Senator Vaki raising that matter, that in reality, the National Assembly should not have gone ahead to pass a Supplementary Appropriation Act before sorting this one on division. But you remember we are in a situation where, because of the failure of the finance bill, everybody was trying to see whether we can get a way of resources being released to the MDS. These are the issues we are sorting. And we are saying, even as we discuss, can we make sure that even these legal issues are taken care of? The second one, as we are discussing, CARA had been passed and pushed to the president. The president has already sent it back with a memorandum saying he can only approve a figure of 390, 380. So by not agreeing on this Division Revenue Amendment Bill, and other legal instruments will have to be amended. And that's what we are saying. Now, if we don't agree, then we need to, immediately this one fails, we need to get to another series of amending other legal instruments, which have already gone through the houses. So it's a more complicated thing than just a political. I agree the loss maintenance levy is an issue which is being discussed. And when members are discussing, we are saying, even as we are discussing today, there's a court case where the Council of Governors have gone to court to stop disbursement of this low maintenance levy funds. Now, if we are saying that if we are here negotiating for resources to go to the counties, and the council is already in court, then how do we resolve this so that when this bill is taken back to the House, members don't say, because you have been taken to court, then we are going to not approve this. So that's why you see it's taking a bit of time. Normally we have two sittings in mediation and we sort out the matter. So this has a bit of complications, challenges because of where we are. And I can assure Kenyans, that's why I said the other day, that we need to push the process slightly more harder, because as we are discussing, the ministries, departments and agencies are accessing resources. The counties are not. So what are the counties doing? Because of the salaries, counties have gone out there negotiating with the banks for overdrafts. And these overdrafts are very, very expensive. So even when we release the money to them, the first thing they have to do is to pay the overdrafts and the interest, which will still be eating on the resources for the counties. And as you are saying, instead of then assisting counties develop their local economies, money will be going to the banks. So these are the challenges, Ayub.
And then, I mean, what's the rationale for the Council of Governors then to move to court over that matter? I mean,
that's what we are asking, and that's why I was saying these are the political. I would call, as an economist, I call them externalities. They are the externalities which are very important, and you can't ignore them because they have gone to court, and as a result of that, we can't even do the rural road, the roads under Kera, because the money cannot be released to Kera because there's a court case. So it makes the whole thing muddy, you know. It becomes muddy because the council is in court, members are saying, withdraw your case from court, then we can also facilitate your resources. And you see, this politics, the so-called politics in courts, you can't also rule them out when it comes to these things.
I think the reason for going to court is basically to seek redress. And Ayub, as we said and agreed, that this is not a new matter. How we deal with concerns, especially from a lessons learned perspective, has been one of the biggest challenges for devolution. And that is purely why some of the agencies that are really supposed to be strengthening devolution are seemingly seen to be clobbering it and really taking us back to regression. And so that, for instance, for Council of Governors, for a mechanism where no one is listening to you, and there are what we sometimes call carrots and sticks. You do this, I give you that. If you fail to do this, I won't give you the carrot. It becomes very difficult. And so the court, therefore, becomes that last room of last redress and resort. And we have seen precedences where, for instance, Mheshimiwa is referring to a Supreme Court ruling, which made very many recommendations. We have not seen exerted effort and progress in terms of executing some of these recommendations. We wait until it is the last minute for discussions on DORA and KARA and all those others, which is really the tail end of the financial year, before we can begin to ask ourselves, by the way, we were here 2 years ago, what happened? So it is important that we have agencies that can constantly remain on standby to address these issues so that we don't see them happening on the floor of the House when it gets to mediation, because mediation is envisioned by the Constitution, okay, both in Public Finance Management Act and even the County Governments Act, but it's a last resort again, same to the mechanism of going to court. But before we establish this joint mediation team, why are we getting to the joint mediation team? It means that there are things that are not working out very well for us to get there. So my recommendation, and we have said this in other areas, is that can we invest time to address the issues before they get to the mediation levels? Because when we do that, then we're able to pick lessons about some of the past failures of DORA and KARA, and even the inability of counties to be able to get their resources, hence, therefore, going to banks for overdrafts. But again, we have to insist that there has to be value also in strengthening the capacities of counties to be able to enhance their own source revenue mechanisms, to even get monies that therefore we do not have to get to a level where we are going to court, we are getting to mediation. Counties, in essence, and from analysis that have been done, Ayub, can be able to self-sustain, even beyond equalization fund and even the equitable share that we are talking about.
We will come to the Commission on Revenue Allocation and also the equalization fund that you have mentioned. But Dr. Makali, can we sustain our devolved units given the challenges that we have faced and what we are facing at the moment? There is the debt aspect and the obligation that Kenya must meet. There is this deficit at the county. There is the deficit the national government must fix. There are now attempts to move away from the begging bowl culture to public-private partnerships, still questions around the procedure and the processes. But can we economically sustain ourselves?
I would say yes, we can. I think following what Osido is saying, we have actually done our parliamentary budget office has done some analysis.
Yeah.
And it shows that if the counties were able to collect their own revenue as expected, there are a lot of leakages. That's the challenge you have. There are lots of leakages. To some extent, they can be able to support quite a big portion of their budget, which can now be supplemented by the equitable share. The challenge is that many of our counties are relying almost 90% on the equitable share, and they don't do much on their own source revenue. From the analysis which has been done, the total collection from the counties in terms of own revenue has actually been increasing by, on average, about 20 billion every year. While the national government, in terms of collection GDP revenue ratio has been declining. But the absolute figures have also been increasing by about another 40 billion. So what we are saying is, if we are able to streamline our collection process and make sure that we minimize leakages, to some extent, over time we'll be able to sustain devolution. And remember, Ayubu, Kenyans have said devolution is the best thing which happened to this country. Out of the 2010 constitution, Kenyans have said out there through surveys that the best thing which happened to this country through 2010 constitution was devolution. And I think that's what we are saying, all of us as Kenyans, we need to do what it takes to make sure that we protect devolution and we promote it.
Okay.
Yes.
And okay, let's take, for example, I want to juxtapose this because equally, even though we talk about the on-source revenue, the capacity of these counties matters, and how they have been close to the center before the devolved system of governance. For example, if you look at the county of Kiambu in comparison with Kakamega County, a population of 1.6 Kiambu, Kakamega 1.9 million. The landmass Kiambu is 2,500 kilometers, Kakamega 3,225. Kiambu has 1,145 kilometers of bitumen roads against a mere 700 kilometers for the entire Western Kenya province, which has 5 counties. Also in Kiambu County, it has 1,145 primary schools against 460 for Kakamega, and 7 in 1,000 infant mortality rate compared to 65 in 1,000 in Kakamega County. Even get Kakamega out of this discussion. Just then, how can you compare, for example, the economic output and strength of counties like Kiambu and, let's say, Busia?
I think basically from the historical perspective, some counties were able to, the 10 districts were able to get some more development than others. And people have quoted the seasonal paper of 1965, the first paper, where in terms of equitable sharing of resources, there's been skewed sharing of resources. And as a result of that, some counties now, which were districts in the past, were able to register higher levels of development compared to others. Some were marginalized, others were well developed. And that's why the issue of equalization fund came in. Because you could see some counties, unless they were given some special treatment, will never catch up with the rest. Then that was one reason. The other reason, as a result of getting this infrastructure, which was laid out using national resources, in the earlier years of independence, while others didn't have, then you would imagine that commerce would normally follow infrastructure where it's well done. So things like businesses were booming in areas like Kiambu. Industries would go to areas where such infrastructure was, while others we didn't have could not get that. So there's a historical perspective to it. But what we are saying now that history is behind us, can we then, because now we have counties who are getting money from the national government, all of them are getting money. I think what we require is what we call now prudent management of those resources, so that the little we are collecting, we are able to apply it well for purposes of developing your local economy. So over time, if Kakamega applies the resources well and Kiambu does the same, over time you might find that Kakamega will be catching up with Kiambu over time, but it can't be instant. And to me, these are the issues. So as you're saying, the historical perspective, we can never ignore it. Areas like Kitui, if you are to compare, you have compared Kiambu with Kakamega. Kitui has over 1 million population. In terms of area, we are over 30,000 square kilometers. If you are to compare us with the Kiambu, we may not even be 8% of what Kiambu has. And we have been existing since 1963. So we are saying we also need affirmative action to make sure that some of these counties come up. And that's why the equitable share, even the allocation, the formula should factor in some of the things you have actually mentioned, so that we have counties catch up with the rest.
And coming to you, Kevin, because Dr. Mulu also pointed out the advice that the Parliamentary Budget Office offers the control of budget critical institutions and also the Auditor General. Now, for example, the Parliamentary Budget Office, Dr. Masinde, who is the director, had pointed out quite a critical statement. He said the cost of imports he talked about, including food and fuel, and the stability of import-oriented businesses that ought to be underpinning our economy. And it has also, he said, led to high levels of unemployment and loss of livelihoods. The COB also pointed out that I have been approving payments for public debt, but I've seen many of those things cannot be identified. You cannot tell what the money was meant for, and therefore there was no economic gain from the borrowing that the government does. And that is what I have for a very long time been concerned about, is what she mentions. It seems we have a problem with fiscal management, Precisely. Even at the national level. So is there an over-focus on the 15% going to the counties, forgetting about the 85% that ought to be audited as well, because fiscal management should be prudent as well at the national level?
Precisely. And in fact, on the matters of division of revenue, we have over-concentrated ourselves to the the county governments, as opposed to the national governments. And if you look at what we are calling economic gains and prudence management of financial resources, it takes us back once again to Schedule 4, functions that are supposed to be adjudicated and implemented by county governments and are still being implemented or managed by the national government, ministries, departments, and even agencies. And so the concern, therefore, is how we take up the recommendations by the controller of budget, and also even the formula that is normally done by Commission on Revenue Allocation. Because remember that that formula is based on Vitukwa ground, population issues. Of course, you've mentioned the landmass, concerns around even prudence management of resources, which was the third basis of the formula. And we have not seen concerns, therefore, that really relate to this issue of prudence management, and hence the issue about corruption and even the goodwill for government to be able to fully devolve. And that is really sometimes is quoted as the reason why government is afraid, quote unquote, to fully devolve, certain counties, certain resources, functions to counties. Okay. So that then they say, but you've not been able to properly use your resources for these particular aspects. How will you be able to do health, for example? How will you be able to fully engage in agriculture? How will you be able to fully do water? And that therefore affects service delivery at the counties, because we are engaging in a very technical conversation, Ayub, that sometimes is not the biggest concern to the citizen. The citizen's concern is that I am able to walk into a health facility and I get my treatment, I get my medicine, and I am fine. That the systems are working and that I don't have to be told, atuna madaktari and all that. And so that commitment to be able to underscore some of those narrations that you are lifting from Parliamentary Budget Office and also the Controller of Budget and even reports from the Auditor General and largely even independent county audit offices, because we also have agencies at the county level that are supposed to be advising on how counties are actually managing their resources. And we don't see deliberate steps that are being made to address some of those issues. And some of them really have got to do with legislative frameworks, so that then the county assemblies rise to the occasion to support the implementation aspects, being the executive, to pass progressive laws that are able to ensure that counties are doing their work. So that, for example, if you look at what we call streams of on-source revenue generation, and you talk about one of them being land rates, there is no reason why counties would still be over-concentrating in laws that were passed in 2016 for valuation roles, and we are talking about 2024. If county assemblies and the legislation arms can therefore be able to fully address the concerns being raised by these independent offices, pass progressive laws that therefore even citizens can use to hold their governments accountable and say, the law that was passed in 2023, 2024 says this. Can we be able to ensure that it is done? Of course, we have seen governors sometimes issuing waivers to, residents of counties and all that. But then we have not also gone back and asked ourselves, so how much revenues can counties be able to raise based on just one stream of resources. And the failure to that is of county assemblies to support counties in passing valuation rolls and laws that relate to taxation at that level. Therefore, to boost in terms of consuming the recommendations from some of those offices like control of budget, engagement and interlinkages with internal audit offices of county governments, and then ultimately the citizens seeing that money is following functions, and that those functions are being implemented in response to the expectations of the citizen.
And Dr. Makali, how then should this conversation at the mediation committee level be about the provision of water, roads, healthcare, and other basic services? Because that's what is lacking. That's the consequence, given that there's no agreement yet.
You know, what would happen is, the things you're mentioning, Ayuba, the things the county government have always been doing. Anytime we give them resources, and they get resources every year. But what we are saying is there are about 4 things they are mentioning which have come up, which were not part of their initial functions. For example, the issue of they are calling them community health promoters. Where the government is meeting a share of it, and they are meeting a share of it. That was initially not part of their budget. So they are saying, if you load some additional activities to us as counties, then the expectation is the government should also be able to provide additional resources to take care of those added functions. And that's the argument. They're saying the 20 million you are taking away from the counties, the 20 billion, is the 20 billion the county should have used to pay the community health workers. I think there's another issue of the museums, as he was mentioning. These things have just been added because initially they were not budgeting for them. So the justification is there, and we have said, gentlemen and ladies, your justification is very clear to all of us as members of parliament, and we all support devolution. But the uniqueness of this particular year, where we have no finance bill, which means we are not going to collect resources as expected, unless now you have seen some attempts to bring some taxes. Unless that happens, then for now, it's just like, I'm telling you, I'll give you 100,000 just by saying it theoretically, but practically, I have no capacity to give you the same money. And that's the argument now we are put on the table, that can we be realistic and say we want to give more money to the counties, and this is justified by the functions and what is expected of them, but the past, which is supposed to give the money, doesn't have the money. So that's the debate, and that's what we are saying. For me, I think in the next 2 meetings, you might be able to agree, because you say that we agree to give them the 400 and then ask ourselves, where do we get the 20 billion? So that you don't give money on paper and then it doesn't flow, what we call the exchequer releases. Because if you give it on paper and there are no exchequer releases, it will still be another problem. Like this financial year, the counties have crossed the financial year with unreleased resources amounting to that 1 billion, which we have to factor into the supplementary budget, so that now they can access the money. We don't want another situation where we still do the same. Come June next year, you've not released that money, and then you have to do another stack of budgeting so that you factor in the resources, because budget's already been done. And this also leading to serious pending bills within the counties. And these are the issues. So we are saying, let's manage in a way that we don't create additional pending bills, but we also manage within what we have. And then the door for public debt is also closed. Because we are saying you can't borrow more. So it's a very tight, I'm telling you, some of us who are financial experts, you find the government is such a tight situation that you sympathize with the government. You don't know what to do.
But is it also a fiscal squeeze that we have put ourselves in as a country, given that we have failed to prudently manage our resources?
That's some factors contributing. A lot of factors contributing to that. One of them is failure to control our expenditure. We spend without really caring much where we are spending. The other issue is issues of corruption. They come to play.
Because I wanted to point this to you, Daktari, and I'm looking at when we had the Finance Act of 2023, and the financial year ended, of course, in 2024, the exchequer revenues totaled up to 2.2 trillion Kenya shillings, agency collections, the housing levy, and etc., 184. This was, it totaled to 2.49 trillion Kenya shillings. It was a jump if you compare it to the financial year 2022-23, which was 2.166 trillion Kenya shillings. Certainly, we seem to be growing towards proper revenue collection.
I said in absolute figures. The figures are increasing.
So in such situations, then what happens? Because our collections, unless they are under collections contributed to by many factors. If you look at the record in the past financial years, it seems then that we are on the right trajectory. Then what will happen?
The best way to look at figures, Ayub, because these are figures now, is always what was projected and what was collected. Projected versus actual. Now, if you look at the 2022-2023 projected, we fell short by about 201 billion. We were not able to collect that. And you remember even our early analysis, because I remember we were discussing with Sam Kituku, we were saying this year's projection of collecting about an additional 400 was overambitious. Because last year's collection there was a shortfall of 201, which means now if you add 201 plus 400, you are planning to collect this financial year alone 600, which was overambitious. So if you analyze the figures, you realize that every year the government does not collect the projected revenue. There is always a deficit. But in terms of absolute figures, the figures keep on being higher than what was last year.
If you compare the financial years.
If you compare the financial years, you find every time you're collecting higher than you collected. But in terms of, again, it's the project, because, you know, it is the projections which determine the budget. But then the actuals determine what was actually done. Anything in between, if it was done, is a roll of either as a pending bill or you have to roll it over to the next financial year.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kevin, sustainability. I mean, it then raises this big concern as to what gets out in terms of the financial leakages. A lot needs to be done, is it? Other than the policy players saying that we can no longer borrow, we are now focusing on PPPs. And because of our tight fiscal space, then down here you have both at the national and the county level cases of financial indiscipline, which is contributing to what Dr. has just mentioned in terms of the projection versus what's collected by the Kenya Revenue Authority. Then how do we move out of this crisis in the end? Because the bearing will be very huge.
So Ayub, that's a very good question. And one of the things that we must do is start by dealing with the leakages, corruption, pilferages, and other issues that really absorb resources in ways that cannot be explained. And in some of the references that you made on the Controller of Budgets reports and other reports, the biggest concern is that counties and government MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies cannot really explain these expenditures. And the concern then is, why can't you explain them, especially given the manner in which the budgeting is done. And if we can be able to therefore invest in dealing with those pilferages, and one of those mechanisms could be digitization, so that the system is digitized both at national and even county levels, and we focus on strengthening capacities of county officials to be able to address digitization and thereby feeding into addressing those pilferages. Number three is, of course, learning from IFMIS. If we can be able to also look at the positive aspects of what the integrated financial management system has been able to really do, and therefore equate and quote figures that we have gained out of digitization of processes like IFMIS. And if you go to the counties, for instance, this concern around on-source revenue, and we have seen counties that have digitized their collection modes and models, really enhancing and trying to show indicative and progressive measures of raising their revenue. And so that, for example, when we had the last Governor Anwar Guru's State of Devolution address, there are various counties that really were propped and praised for having enhanced their own source revenue. And if you look at what counties are doing, then this issue of self-sustaining is really one thing that also needs to be overemphasized, because it therefore means that if we can be able to do certain things that some counties are doing, then counties don't have to over-concentrate in equitable share. So that, for example, if you look at projections that have been done, Ayub, for various years, from 2021, 2022, up to this year where we are at right now, counties actually are able to raise over 220 billion of on-source revenue, which is even more than what we are expecting from the national government. And if you look at counties like Turkana with OSR performance of 241.2%, and Turkana, if you look at Turkana and you compare it with some of the indices that you are reading earlier on, you know, you ask yourself, why is Turkana there for? What is it that it is doing to be able to enhance its OSR? Look at Vihiga at 136.3%. You go to Kirinyaga at 118.4. You go to Lamu at 116.2. Nandi 113. Wajir 110. Garissa 108. Nyeri 106. Samburu 104. Muranga 102%, and none of the cities, Ayub, is actually being mentioned here. There is no mention of Mombasa, there is no mention of Nairobi here, there is no mention of Kisumu, there is no mention of bigger cities like even Eldoret. And so we ask ourselves if some of these counties that have really been looked at even to be extremely marginalized can be able to underscore and enhance their own source revenue. So what is this thing that they are doing that counties need to do? And then lastly is again going back to the county assemblies. And some Mheshimiwa told me that wewe ukiwa kwa TV, you are too hard on us. And this is Mheshimiwa Chege Mwaura. And it is because the citizens expect a lot from the members of county assemblies. So they must ensure that they pass legislations that will also be able to support counties to enhance their revenue. And one of those is laws around digitization and ETC.
And oversight generally.
Exactly.
Honorable Makali, ideally, how does the auditing process take place of what needs to go to the county and what is the rationale? It's based on what?
You know, just as the same way the Auditor General audits the expenditure of government agencies, the office also does audit of the revenue collection, actually. So there is also audit of the revenue. And normally what would happen is some of the figures you see people, that's why you see, for you to determine how much will go to the counties, you have to use the audited and approved revenue figures by the Auditor General. Because that's what confirms actually what was collected. And it's on the basis of those figures you release the money. So the Auditor General also has input into the whole idea. The other which is very important, and which I think, to me, we've not been able to make use of it effectively, is what we call the Commission on Revenue Allocation. That commission is supposed, through research, scientific approach, to be advising both the national government and IBEC, that is IBEC mostly, and Parliament, in terms of how to share these resources. Because there is normally a scientific approach to it. But you realize that in most cases, the recommendations are not taken on board. The law just demands that when you don't take the recommendation on board, then you must explain why. It doesn't demand that you must take the recommendation. It says, in case you don't take the recommendation on board, then justify the reason. And I think that's where the gap is. For me, I would want to see a situation, because this is proper research. They look at all the figures Osido is mentioning. They look at all the figures, and based on those figures, they're able to project and say, in the coming year, the economy will grow by this rate. On the basis of that, revenue will grow by this rate. On the basis of that, then can we share the revenue at this level, both the levels of the government? But there's minimal use of their research.
And I meant based on which last audited account.
Yeah, like now we are 21-22. That's the amount we use.
21-22.
And based on that, then we are at 25 point. Was it 24.2%?
24. 24.2%.
While the requirement is 15%.
15%.
Which Ayub is another concern.
Yeah, that's another concern.
Yeah, you ask yourself, why are we lagging in terms of audit?
Coming to that point, because if you were, then minimum was 15, so we can go as high as possible, depending on other factors that we have mentioned, including goodwill. So if what was supposed to be going to the counties is supposed to be based on the last audited 2021-22 financial year, which then accounts for 24.2%, then this mathematically is way above even the contentious 380.
It's around 24%.
Which is large, mathematically will come to more than 400 billion Kenya shillings.
Precisely. By far. And that is why, if you look at the initial Senate's recommendation of 400.01 billion, the expectation was that the narrative around last audited accounts.
Yes.
Because the last audited accounts and how the budget appropriation is done is supposed to relate to vitu kwa ground. Because now you are using 4 years back to be able to appropriate resources
for
based
today.
on today's cost of living, expenditures, etc. So there is supposed to be push to Parliament to also consider hastening reasons as to why they cannot be able to bring up to speed and update this last audited account. There is no reason why we are talking 2024 and yet the budget is still behind, working on 2021, 2022.
Yeah. But I think we have to give it actually. Before the current CS Treasury, Honorable Mbandi, became the CS, he was the chair of PAC, which normally processes audit. And they reduced that period to only a difference of 1 year. So if Parliament now approves the last report they've submitted to Parliament, we'll only be having a difference of 1 year. So that by the time you do budgets, you have only one financial year which has not been approved by the House coming to the current year, which is quite a big we must give it to them. That was a good effort. But the wish of Kenyans is that we be as current as possible. So that we allocate resources which we are collecting today.
Yeah, that plus then the unbundling of all the functions, then the resource will automatically follow. Then we should be talking about 680 billion.
Precisely. Actually, it's
around that figure.
The projected figure is about 720 billion. 720. Because if you look at the totality of what Minister of Health still maintains, Minister of Housing, Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Water, because the Constitution envisions that for those national government functions should only be on policy advisory, which then would be adopted by counties. But then you ask yourself, why would they still be holding on to resources? If you do the totality of what Minister of Health, for example, has, it is almost 20% more than what the totality of all the departments of county governments on health will be budgeting. So why would one ministry be holding resources which should be taken to 47 other governments? So I think political goodwill really is serious. But then it is also, we also must not lift our eyes from other technical and political and financial issues. Remember that even at these ministries that we are talking about, they also have human resource. So the question would be, what will you be doing to the officers at the Ministry of Health at the national level, agriculture, water, and all those others?
Thank you. Let's now sample the feedback. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Here's what you are saying briefly. As we finish up, Babu Michael K says, as the mediation team can continue to break the stalemate about the county funds disbursement, it's also said when much is given, much is expected. In this line, what have various specific counties done with the monies they have been receiving over time? Bob Otieno says the standoff between senators and the members of the National Assembly over allocation of funds to counties is all about corruption encouraged by greediness with the intention of sharing slice of the money for their own benefits. Engineer Lazaro says the hit of the Trump surprise victory is being felt all over the world. Time for Africans to build their own institutions and learn to exchange ideologies amongst themselves instead of heavily depending on Wasungu for neocolonialism.
It's a good one.
Wasungu.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Makali Mulu, lawmaker representing Kitui Central Constituency, a member of the National Assembly's Budget Committee, as well as Kevin Osido, who is the Executive Director at the County Governance Watch. And thanks to you too for working up with us here on the broadcast and keeping your feedback coming here. We thank you. Your company has been worthy. I am Ayub Abdikadir. Good morning.
Thank you.